Canada is finally advancing on the Mackenzie River, a move that directly cuts into Donald Trump's leverage over this country. For years, Washington's economic pressure worked because Canada had only one practical export direction, south. One president could choke aluminum, autos, critical minerals, aircraft, and energy with a single tariff announcement. But the Mackenzie River changes the terrain. It gives Canada a northern route Trump cannot block, cannot tax, and cannot threaten. As the Arctic opens and global competition accelerates, this corridor becomes more than geography. It becomes the strategic tool that flips the US-Canada power dynamic. While Trump leans harder into weaponized tariffs and reshoring, Canada is facing a different horizon, one in which the country's most underused natural asset finally becomes a shield against American economic coercion.
Stretching from Great Slave Lake to the Beaufort Sea, the Mackenzie Corridor links the resource-rich interior of Western Canada directly to the Arctic Ocean. It drains 20% of the country and crosses regions that hold oil sands, major mineral belts, hydro capacity, and large freshwater reserves. For decades, Canada ignored this advantage, choosing to build all infrastructure around the US border because it was cheaper, simpler, and seemed geopolitically safe. That assumption collapsed the moment Trump weaponized tariffs across nearly every Canadian export category. Combine this with an Arctic that now opens for longer navigable seasons, Russia building bases, China financing northern trade routes, and the US upgrading Alaska's strategic systems, and the Mackenzie stops being an overlooked river. It becomes the backbone of Canada's economic independence and Arctic sovereignty. This is the moment when Canada can finally break out of the economic trap Trump relies on.
The Mackenzies stayed dormant because ice locked the river for most of the year, and infrastructure could not keep pace with permafrost and distance. But the modern Arctic is changing. Longer open water seasons allow cargo movement through the Beaufort Sea, turning a once frozen coastline into a seasonal export window. For Canada, this shift is monumental. For the first time, the country gains a transport route that does not depend on Washington's goodwill or American border choke points. Trump can raise tariffs, but he cannot close the Arctic. He cannot stop a river Canada controls end to end. The climate may be warming for the wrong reasons, but strategically, it hands Canada a corridor the United States cannot touch.
The legal contest over the Northwest Passage is ultimately a test of presence. Canada calls it internal waters. The US calls it an international strait. The side that commands real infrastructure, population, and operational capability in the region will win the argument. Developing the Mackenzie allows Canada to project continuous authority along its western Arctic flank. Ports, staging areas, monitoring systems, and year-round access roads strengthen a sovereignty claim that Washington has tried to dilute for decades. Every new northern installation reinforces the legal case. Every kilometer of road weakens the American position that these are open international waters. A stronger Mackenzie corridor does not just help Canada. It undermines one of Trump's long-standing strategic ambitions, reducing Canadian control over the Arctic Gateway.
Trump's tariff strategy works because Canada is forced to move almost everything south. The Mackenzie breaks that structural dependency. Once Arctic access is operational, Canada gains an export outlet Trump cannot block. The economic upside is massive. Gas fields in the Mackenzie Delta and Beaufort region hold volumes worth tens of billions, with long-term estimates stretching well beyond $100 billion once LNG integration matures. Critical minerals across the Northwest Territories could feed global battery and clean tech supply chains worth many more billions. Even conservative forecasts suggest that a functioning northern logistics route could generate several $1 billion annually from cargo movement alone. Over a generation, the combined economic benefit, energy, minerals, logistics, northern employment, reaches into the hundreds of billions. And every dollar that moves north instead of south is a dollar removed from Trump's leverage. A diversified export map means Canada can say no to tariff pressure without risking economic collapse. Trump's threats lose force once Canada has a corridor he cannot interfere with.
Russia can deploy icebreakers, China can invest in the Polar Silk Road, and the US can reinforce Alaska's military posture. But none of them can replicate what geography gave Canada. The Mackenzie is a natural, continuous artery from the continent's interior to the Arctic Ocean. It is not a project, not an engineered pathway, but a built-in national advantage. This corridor lets Canada anchor its Arctic presence, while other powers compete for access through choke points and contested waters. If Canada develops it, the country shifts from being a secondary Arctic participant to a decisive Arctic actor. In a world where every major power is scrambling for northern influence, this single corridor gives Canada a form of leverage that Trump cannot counter with tariffs or political pressure. Prime Minister Mark Carney faces a reality Canadians increasingly recognize. Dependence on a single American corridor is dangerous. Trump's second-term tariffs on autos, steel, aluminum, clean tech components, and even aircraft certification exposed the structural risk embedded in the Canadian economy. Turning north is not symbolic, it is strategic self-defense. A developed McKenzie aligns with Carney's goals, doubling non-U.S. exports, expanding critical mineral capacity, securing clean energy dominance, and restoring Arctic sovereignty. It also delivers tangible economic impact for northern communities through billions in infrastructure spending and thousands of jobs. More importantly, it shifts Canada away from a reactive posture under Trump toward an independent trajectory Washington cannot dictate.
If Canada commits fully, the Mackenzie Corridor becomes an economic engine worth hundreds of billions over the coming decades and a geopolitical shield against U.S. coercion. It gives Canada sovereignty muscle, export diversification, and the only Arctic trade position grounded in geography rather than military assets. A partial build still strengthens Canada's hand, but leaves room for vulnerability. Doing nothing keeps Canada trapped in the same dynamic Trump exploits, vulnerable to tariffs, reliant on American routes, and sidelined in the Arctic century now unfolding. The choice determines whether Canada spends the next 50 years under Washington's leverage or escapes it entirely.
The Arctic is opening, Trump is escalating economic pressure, and Canada finally has a structural advantage others cannot imitate. The Mackenzie River is not nostalgia. It is the country's clearest path out of U.S. dependency and into a position of true northern influence. Trump can threaten tariffs and punish industries, but he cannot kill a corridor Canada owns outright. The only question now is whether Canada will use the one advantage that places it beyond Trump's reach.
A new U.S. tariff threat, this time focusing on Canadian fertilizer.
A lot of it does come in from Canada, and so we'll end up putting very severe tariffs on that if we have to, because that's the way you want to bolster here, and we can do it here.
While Trump provided no specifics on what that severe tariff could look like, it would seriously impact U.S. farmers.
Donald Trump has a new target in his trade war playbook: Canadian potash, the fertilizer that keeps North American agriculture alive. And here's the part Washington is trying very hard not to say out loud. If Trump actually follows through with tariffs on Canadian fertilizer, it won't be Canada that suffers. It will be American farmers, already under pressure from high costs and shrinking margins, who pay the price. Canada walks away stable. The United States walks straight into a crisis of its own making. During a recent Q&A session, Trump floated the idea of imposing what he called very severe tariffs on fertilizer imports, emphasizing that a large share comes from Canada. This threat arrives in the middle of an already turbulent year for American agriculture. Potash prices have been rising globally, U.S. input costs are at record highs, and the Trump administration has been juggling both trade disputes and plans to reshore production that simply does not exist at scale inside the United States. Meanwhile, Canada, under Prime Minister Mark Carney, is expanding its foothold as the world's most reliable supplier of potash. Saskatchewan alone produces a massive share of global output, and according to recent reporting from Reuters, roughly 80% of America's potash imports come from Canada. In other words, Trump is not threatening a marginal supplier. He is threatening the foundation of America's fertilizer supply chain. Before diving into the political fallout, let's look at the structural reality. Canada isn't just a participant in the potash industry. Canada dominates it. Saskatchewan produces more potash than any other place on Earth. When Trump talks about imposing tariffs as a way to push fertilizer production back to the United States, he is speaking as if America has untapped potash reserves waiting to be mined.
It doesn't. Canada's supply is unmatched, reliable, and geologically irreplaceable. Cutting it off is like deciding to make gasoline expensive because you want drivers to switch cars. The intention may sound bold, but it does nothing to change the underlying dependence. And beyond simple geology, Canada's advantage comes from decades of long-term planning. Ottawa has treated potash as a strategic export, not a bargaining chip. The country built world-class infrastructure, stable regulatory systems, and long-standing relationships with major agricultural markets. That combination means Canada doesn't flinch when threatened. It simply points to the global demand it already serves, demand that continues to grow as nations scramble for secure fertilizer sources.
This is where the economic reality becomes unavoidable. American farmers cannot grow corn, soybeans, or wheat at competitive yields without potash. Fertilizer isn't optional. It is 20% or more of the cost structure of a typical corn operation. Potash is the core element that keeps soil fertile, and right now the United States has no alternative producer capable of meeting national demand. If tariffs push potash prices higher, costs for farmers will jump instantly. Economists in Illinois and Ohio warn that prices could climb by more than $100 per ton if a tariff is enforced. That may sound like a small number in Washington, but for farmers running thousands of acres, it translates into tens of thousands of dollars in unexpected expenses. For many, that wipes out annual profit entirely. For others, it becomes the difference between continuing or closing their operation. We've seen this pattern before. During the trade war with China, soybean farmers watched their markets collapse. Now, the same administration is flirting with a policy that would raise the cost of the fertilizer those same farmers depend on. And here's the most revealing detail. The U.S. government already had to announce a $12 billion farm relief program this month to offset losses tied to trade conflicts. If potash tariffs hit, that bailout number could easily double.
While Trump threatens tariffs, Canada is doing the opposite. Ottawa is positioning Canada as the world's dependable provider of critical minerals. The Carney government has been expanding partnerships with Asia, reinforcing supply chains with Europe, and accelerating investment in Saskatchewan's potash sector. When global markets look for stability in fertilizer supply, they look to Canada, not because Canada demands attention, but because Canada delivers reliability. If the United States chooses to make potash more expensive for itself, Canada will not be scrambling to find customers. India, Brazil, Indonesia, and much of Europe are standing in line. A tariff doesn't weaken Canada. It simply redirects exports to markets that are already eager to buy. There's another angle Trump's team cannot ignore. His political base is deeply rural. Farmers, especially in the Midwest, are key to his electoral coalition. But those same farmers are the ones who stand to lose the most. They rely on affordable potash. They rely on stable supply. They rely on Canada far more than Washington likes to admit. Trump may talk about protecting American workers, but potash is not like steel or aluminum. You can't build a new mine in 2 years. You can't flip a switch and reshore a mineral deposit. Fertilizer is geology, not politics. The people who understand that live in farm country, not in front of television cameras. If tariffs go forward, Trump risks forcing his own supporters into deeper financial strain. The images that will come out of rural America won't be stories of strength. They will be farmers explaining why they can no longer absorb skyrocketing fertilizer bills. The world is entering a decade where food security equals national security. Two major potash exporters, Russia and Belarus, are constrained by sanctions and geopolitical tensions. That leaves Canada as the one major stable supplier. Countries are already shifting long-term contracts toward Canada because it is predictable, democratic, and insulated from geopolitical shocks. If the U.S. undermines its relationship with Canada, it accelerates a trend already underway. Global buyers strengthening ties with Ottawa. A tariff would not shrink Canada's influence, it would expand it. If Trump turns Canadian potash into the next battlefield of his trade war, the political theater may look dramatic, but the economic reality is simple.
American fertilizer prices will surge, farm incomes will sink, bailout spending will climb, food production will face new risks, and the only country that emerges more stable, more trusted, and more strategically positioned in global agriculture is Canada. The message is clear. When you wage a trade war against the country that supplies the fertilizer beneath your own fields, the boomerang always comes back. So the question for Washington is no longer whether tariffs sound strong. The question is whether America is prepared to sacrifice its own farmers to keep that performance going.
Well, the reports are that U.S. Ambassador Pete Hoekstra berated using profane language Ontario's representative in Washington.
Calls are growing for Ottawa to issue a formal diplomatic rebuke against U.S. Ambassador Pete Hoekstra after an extraordinary scene at a black tie gala in downtown Ottawa. What began as a routine event celebrating Canada-U.S. business ties ended with stunned guests, awkward silence, and headlines across two countries. Witnesses say Hoekstra angrily confronted Ontario's trade representative, David Patterson, using language so harsh that even his own wife later apologized to the Canadian official. It was supposed to be a night of goodwill between partners. Instead, it turned into a reminder that tone can break trust faster than policy ever could. The incident has now become more than a diplomatic embarrassment. It is a test of how Canada defines respect in its most important relationship and whether Washington still knows how to treat a friend.
The confrontation unfolded Monday evening at the National Gallery of Canada during an event organized by the Canada-US Business Council. According to multiple reports carried by AP News and Politico Canada, Hoekstra berated David Patterson, accusing him of undermining the Trump administration through Ontario's recent ad campaign. The campaign had quoted Ronald Reagan's 1987 speech praising free trade, a message that now rings uncomfortably against Washington's new protectionist tone. Witnesses say the ambassador's outburst was public and profane. It shocked not only business leaders, but also senior diplomats present at the gala. By the next morning, Ontario Premier Doug Ford publicly demanded an apology, calling Hoekstra's conduct unacceptable and unworthy of a senior diplomat. At Carleton University, foreign policy scholar Fen Hampson published a column in Policy magazine urging Canada's Foreign Ministry, Global Affairs, to summon the U.S. ambassador for what diplomats call a démarche, a formal expression of disapproval. It is a gesture rarely used between close allies, yet in this case, even moderate voices in Ottawa said it might be necessary to preserve decorum. Within 48 hours, the episode had moved from dinner party gossip to a national debate about diplomatic boundaries. For many Canadians, it was not simply about one man losing his temper, it was about the shifting attitude coming from Washington.
And, as many have noted, he was behaving like a proconsul in some distant colonial outpost, not the ambassador of the most powerful country in the world in a friendly, neighborly setting.
To understand why this moment resonates so deeply, it helps to remember what diplomacy is built on: tone, restraint, and mutual respect. Ambassadors are trained to advocate for their government without crossing the line into intimidation. In Ottawa's view, that line was crossed the moment a U.S. envoy publicly humiliated a provincial official on Canadian soil. Foreign policy experts noted that diplomacy often depends as much on civility as on substance. The words of an ambassador can shape not just negotiations, but the overall atmosphere of trust that allows trade and security cooperation to function. When civility gives way to contempt, both sides lose credibility. What makes the Hoekstra episode different is that it did not occur behind closed doors. It happened in a professional setting, witnessed by officials, journalists, and guests who expect diplomacy to represent stability. Canada's concern, then, is not just about one confrontation, but about a broader erosion of norms that once defined relations between allies.
Even as President Trump's administration continues to push for tariffs and America First policies, this incident underscores that diplomacy is not measured in duties or dollars. It is measured in the ability to disagree without losing dignity. Ottawa now faces a delicate decision: how to defend its principles without deepening the rift. Premier Doug Ford's demand for a direct apology put pressure on Global Affairs Canada to act. The ministry has several tools, ranging from private communication to a formal summoning of the ambassador. A démarche would be the diplomatic equivalent of a public reprimand, serious but short of expulsion. Officials close to the process told CBC News that such a step would be measured and respectful, not punitive. The goal is to re-establish tone, not to ignite a standoff. For Prime Minister Mark Carney's government, the episode arrives at a sensitive moment. Canada is preparing for the 2026 review of the US-Mexico-Canada Agreement and is already navigating multiple layers of tariffs and investment tensions. Yet, Carney's cabinet also insists that national dignity cannot be treated as a negotiable commodity. The government's emerging approach is what analysts call quiet firmness. Rather than public confrontation, Ottawa signals its displeasure through institutional channels, firm enough to uphold principle, calm enough to keep dialogue alive. In the world of diplomacy, restraint can speak louder than outrage, and this time, Canada appears determined to let composure be its message.
The controversy around Pete Hoekstra may seem like a personal lapse, but it reflects a deeper transformation in North American diplomacy. Over the past year, Washington's tone with allies has become increasingly transactional. Trade negotiations have been reframed as zero-sum tests of loyalty. The language of cooperation has been replaced by that of leverage and threats. In this climate, an ambassador's public outburst becomes more than a mistake. It becomes a symbol of how the U.S. now projects power. Canada's response, by contrast, offers a different model. Instead of trading insults, Ottawa reaffirms the quiet strength of institutional diplomacy. Observers note that this difference in style has real consequences. As Washington leans on pressure, Canada has deepened engagement across Asia and Europe, signing new energy and defense partnerships with South Korea and opening trade talks with ASEAN. These moves are not retaliation, they are diversification. Each step underscores a strategic shift away from dependence on a single partner whose tone has grown unpredictable. Within Canada, the incident has also struck an emotional chord. Citizens who once viewed the U.S. relationship as untouchable now talk about mutual respect as something that must be earned, not assumed. For many, the Hoekstra affair captures a turning point, a friendly nation learning to draw boundaries politely but firmly. In the end, this is not just a diplomatic story. It is a story about character, how a country responds when tested by arrogance, and how it chooses restraint over retaliation. The call for a formal rebuke of Ambassador Hoekstra has become more than a bureaucratic issue. It is a statement about respect in international life. Canada's measured reaction demonstrates that strength does not always roar. Sometimes it speaks softly, through the steady voice of principle. The United States remains Canada's largest trading partner and closest ally, but friendship cannot erase the need for courtesy. In diplomacy, words can build bridges or burn them. What happened at the National Gallery was a reminder that tone itself carries power. As the story unfolds, one lesson stands out clearly. In an age of tariffs, tempers, and televised politics, respect is still a diplomatic currency. And this week, Ottawa quietly reminded Washington what that currency is worth.
What's happening in Brampton at the Stellantis facility is completely unacceptable. Stellantis made a commitment, a promise, to invest in that plant, to invest in Canadian workers. And our government expects them to honor that promise, full stop. We will always fight for auto workers.
In the city of Brampton, Ontario, the sound of industry has faded. The once busy Stellantis assembly plant, where generations of workers built cars with pride, now stands quiet. For thousands of Canadian families, that silence means uncertainty and a deep sense of betrayal. When the automaker confirmed it would move Jeep Compass production to Illinois, the news hit like a blow. But this time, Canada's government didn't simply express disappointment, it acted. Industry Minister Melanie Joly announced that Ottawa will launch a formal dispute resolution process against Stellantis, a move that could see taxpayer money recovered and production forced back to Canadian soil. Her message was clear: when a company takes public funds and walks away, Canada will make it pay. The announcement came after weeks of tension. On October 15, Stellantis revealed its plan to shift production south of the border, leaving hundreds of Canadian workers in limbo. Just a year earlier, that same company had accepted more than $100 million from Ottawa as part of a larger commitment to expand production at Brampton. For the government, it wasn't just a broken promise, it was a violation of trust. The automaker had been a cornerstone of Canada's industrial identity. During the 2008 financial crisis, Canadian taxpayers stepped in to save the company from collapse. Now, as the plant sits idle, many Canadians feel that the company has turned its back on the very people who once still buy it. Joly's response captured that frustration. Within days, she called the company's decision completely unacceptable, warning that Ottawa expected Stellantis to honor its commitments to Canadian workers. That statement marked a turning point, a declaration that the era of silent concessions was over.
We were clear. Stellantis is on the hook. On October 23rd, together with the Minister of Finance, we announced a 50% reduction in Stellantis' annual remission quota. That means Stellantis has 50% less of a market for its cars without tariffs in our country.
Behind Joly's words was a rapid sequence of concrete actions. The day after the Stellantis announcement, she wrote directly to Antonio Filosa, the company's global CEO, to express the government's position. 5 days later, she summoned Stellantis Canada's chief executive to Ottawa for a closed-door meeting, attended by Ontario's Economic Development Minister Vic Fedeli and Unifor President Lana Payne. The message was unified. Canada expected accountability. On October 23rd, Ottawa followed through. The government cut Stellantis' annual duty-free import quota by 50%, a penalty designed to limit the company's access to the Canadian market. And by the end of that month, Joly confirmed that the government would start the 30-day period of formal dispute resolution under the contracts signed with Stellantis. In practical terms, this means Canada is preparing to recover public money already dispersed, roughly $105 million so far, according to government documents tabled in Parliament. But the deeper meaning runs beyond finances. It signals that Canada is reshaping how it deals with global corporations. For years, Ottawa offered subsidies and tax breaks to secure jobs, often with little enforcement when those commitments fell through. Joly's approach is different. She is using legal tools, not public appeals, to hold companies to their word. Her actions suggest a new industrial doctrine, one where public money must deliver public value.
The Stellantis case has become more than a business dispute. It is a national test of confidence. Canada's auto sector supports more than 550,000 direct and indirect jobs, according to Statistics Canada's 2024 industry report. In Ontario alone, the auto supply chain contributes nearly 13% of the province's manufacturing GDP. Losing even one major production line reverberates far beyond the factory floor, affecting suppliers, small businesses, and entire communities built around the industry. For the government, letting Stellantis walk away would send the wrong message, not only to workers, but to every company negotiating with Ottawa. The dispute resolution process shows that Canada will now defend its industrial interests through the rule of law rather than political pressure.
This moment also strengthens the credibility of Canada's broader Buy Canadian vision, which Prime Minister Mark Carney unveiled earlier this year. The idea is simple. Public investments should reinforce domestic production and national resilience. Jolie's decision turns that principle into action. By holding Stellantis to account, Ottawa is setting a precedent for the upcoming 2026 USMCA review, where questions of investment and production commitments are expected to resurface. Canada's position is becoming clear. International agreements mean little if domestic jobs are treated as negotiable.
In Brampton, the reaction has been deeply personal. Workers who once celebrated the plant's future now speak about uncertainty, mortgages, and retirement plans suddenly at risk. Many have spent decades on the same assembly lines, weathering every economic storm since the 1990s. When Jolie visited the city last week, she met with employees who described what the closure meant for their families. She reminded them that Canada had stood by Stellantis through crises, from the 2008 bailout to the pandemic's production shutdowns, and that now it was the company's turn to stand by Canada. Her remarks resonated because they appealed to something larger than policy. For many Canadians, the Brampton dispute isn't just about jobs, it's about respect for labor, for taxpayers, and for a country that has often been treated as a secondary branch of North America's auto network.
Beyond Brampton, the dispute sends a signal to multinational corporations that the Canadian market comes with expectations. Ottawa is making it clear that public investment carries obligations, not just profits. It also redefines Canada's role in a global economy increasingly shaped by protectionism and industrial realignment. Instead of retaliating with tariffs or political threats, the Carney government is using contracts, transparency, and accountability to assert national strength. This approach contrasts with the noise of trade wars and aligns more closely with the country's image as a reliable but firm partner. Across Canada, opinion polls from Nanos Research in late October show growing public support for a tougher stance on corporate accountability, especially in industries that receive government funding. That sentiment cuts across political lines, uniting both labor groups and small business owners who believe domestic production is essential to the country's long-term prosperity.
The Stellantis dispute may take months to resolve, but its symbolic impact is already visible. It marks a shift from dependence to determination, from hoping companies will honor their promises to ensuring that they do. For the first time in years, Ottawa is treating a broken corporate commitment as a national offense, not a bureaucratic setback. The message is simple and unmistakable. Canadian jobs, paid for by Canadian taxpayers, deserve Canadian accountability. As the lights remain dim in the Brampton plant, there is also a quiet sense of unity building across the country. People who once felt powerless against corporate decisions now see their government standing beside them, not behind them. In that sense, this dispute is about more than a factory or a contract. It's about national pride, the belief that Canada's future will be written not by foreign boardrooms, but by the workers and communities who built its industries from the ground up. And if the government succeeds in bringing production back to Brampton, it will not just reopen a plant, it will reopen a sense of confidence that Canada, when pushed, can fight for itself and win.